New Minnesota Twins manager Derek Shelton is getting back to basics early in spring training and why it's the right message, but an uphill battle.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Twins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm CJ Baumgartner, Twins writer for Zone Coverage and a lifelong Twins fan just like you. Today, we take a look at the third base outlook for the Minnesota Twins, why it's Royce Lewis and behind him. We take a look at all of that. We also take a peek at should the Twins maybe just float Pablo López a little extension to help him get through the next part of his career with the Tommy John and post and things like that. We explore all the options, but first, Derek Shelton. I mean, getting lost in the Pablo injury news, getting lost in the Derek Falvey news, getting lost in just the flurry of what has been a weirdly uneventful and very eventful Minnesota Twins offseason has been that they have a new manager in Derek Shelton. And what does this mean? Now, he has some Twins familiarity being the bench coach in 2018 and 2019. Of course, was with the Pittsburgh Pirates since then, got fired in May of last year, and now is back with the Minnesota Twins, this time as skipper. He interviewed for the job in 2019 when it eventually went to Rocco Baldelli, but he is now the Twins manager. And the very first impression that I had of Derek Shelton was that he is going to do a lot of the same things Rocco Baldelli has done. That's why Derek Falvey hired him, right? I said it way back when they fired Baldelli, or even when there was talk of getting rid of Baldelli, was that if you get rid of Baldelli, you're probably going to get another manager who's very similar to Rocco. And the Twins are in a way, and they're not in a way. They are getting a manager in Derek Shelton who will do a lot of the same platooning, who will do a lot of the same lineup construction, most likely a lot of the same substitutions for pitchers and bullpen moves. We're going to see a lot of those things most likely stay the same, for better or worse. But where we will see a difference in is the tenor, is the kind of underlying aspects, the handling the clubhouse, the just kind of presence he has in the dugout. Rocco is this laid back, confident, kind of collected guy up until he's yelling at umpires, in which case it's hilarious. But it's kind of that laid back. You hear him in TV interviews and he just gives a very similar answer a lot of the times, very laid back, not overreacting in a majority of Rocco Baldelli interviews. And I think Derek Shelton, not that I'm saying that that's a bad thing from Baldelli, but Derek Shelton will be different. He is more of that, again, in the limited interaction, just a jovial, like a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more in your face. And I was having this conversation with a coworker yesterday. Not that it's a one-to-one comparison, but very Ron Gardenhire-like, right? Like battle their tails off kind of thing. We're going to be seeing a lot of that from Derek Shelton. Like he is going to have that attitude more than Rocco Baldelli did. Again, I'm not criticizing Rocco Baldelli. He was fine over the course of his tenure as the Twins manager. Had some good moments, had some bad moments. Overall, a good run as manager. Could have been better, could have been a lot worse. So for Shelton, what does this mean through the first week of camp? One of the biggest critiques of Rocco Baldelli also, other than the platooning, other than the quick hook Rocco, other than being too stoic in the dugout, one of the biggest concerns was fundamentals. And one of the very first drills that Derek Shelton did as the Twins' new head of the dugout was that he was focusing on PFP, which is something that you do in the first practice. Obviously, only pitchers and catchers are there. You're doing a lot of pitchers and catchers fielding work. But what they focused on was they focused on plays that had impacted a couple teams throughout the playoffs with their pitchers mishandling throws. And I guarantee one of them is the Orion Kirkring throw that got the Dodgers into the NLCS. Or was it that NLCS. So looking at those plays, but also if you remember, the Minnesota Twins committed a bevy, like an uncharacteristically high amount of pitching errors. Bailey Ober had one, Louis Varland had one. I think of like at least 3 from the first 3 weeks of the season that come to mind that not only just look bad, but also cost the Minnesota Twins games. And ultimately, in the end, it didn't matter. But it still is just that early impression of a team. It's just the things that you got to be able to take care of. And it's the things fans like to see, right? Or hate to see when it comes to the fundamentals getting screwed up. But fans love to see a team doing the little things right. And so you've seen Derek Shelton take this messaging of own the drill and owning the drill and just doing your job and all that stuff. And it's something every manager says. So I'm not trying to say that, wow, it's deep, it's this big level. Rocco never said to throw the ball to the right base. Like, obviously, that's what he said. And I think overall, from Rocco, and it's nothing against Rocco as manager, I don't think all of the fundamental errors, like errors are going to happen over a course of a season. I don't think all of them can get just pinned on the manager. A lot of it does get pinned on the players, but at the end of the day, the manager's job is to get the players to execute. And for whatever reason, whether it was bad luck, whether it was bad managing, whatever the reason was, Rocco Baldelli could not get the Minnesota Twins to play fundamental baseball in a lot of areas, base running, including not just stolen bases, but just overall, there'd just be some bad base running plays by the Twins, or it never felt like they really could push the envelope the way they wanted to. It felt like with the Minnesota Twins in terms of fielding, they were always in rough shape. And for whatever reason, Rocco Baldelli just could not smooth out the rough parts of the Twins in those aspects. And Derek Shelton gets his chance to. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Derek Shelton can, because this is a lot of the same roster, if not a worse roster than what Baldelli had last year, depending on what part of the season you're talking about. So this is an uphill battle for Derek Shelton because he still has the players that Rocco had. And if Shelton is on par of a manager as Rocco, you're going to see a lot of the same stuff. But where I think Shelton can make an impression on Twins fans is, one, being a little more forward-facing, be a little more outgoing in terms of your post-game interviews, and just be a little more quotable. That was kind of Gardy's thing too, right? He just kind of would say something or have a quote that would just be endearing to the fan base. And I think not that Baldelli didn't or couldn't do that, but I think Shelton has the capability to do that a little better. But the other thing is just getting them to play fundamentally sound baseball. It's easier said than done, right? You have to get it done, though. That's the biggest thing. If he wants to make a good impression on the fan base, it's going to be showing that this team is playing clean baseball. They're playing the fundamentals early. They're doing exactly what they needed to do. The other thing, though, I will say is that the Minnesota Twins, as currently constructed, and again, a lot of the same roster that Baldelli had is what Shelton is dealing with. The front office didn't exactly do Baldelli favors when it came to getting him guys that could run the bases well. They typically got a lot of guys that were slow. They didn't, Joey Gallo's, your Nelson Cruz's, Michael A. Taylor had a little bit of speed by the end of his career, but didn't have the speed that he had early on. Harrison Bader is maybe like the only exception of a guy the Twins got that was a legitimate base stealer. Your Manuel Margot's and your other players over the course of years, Logan Morrison's, if you want to go all the way back to the beginning. It's not like the Twins really prioritized getting speed players. And the Twins, for whatever reason, coming up through the minors, just haven't had a ton of players that were able to showcase their speed, mainly because of injuries. Think Byron Buxton, injuries. How many more bases could he have stolen had he not been hurt? The Twins' stolen base numbers would have looked different. You think of Royce Lewis, who could have been a pretty good base stealer for the early seasons of his career, is starting to find that groove again. But the back-to-back ACL surgeries are going to do that to your speed. You're going to lose a step or two or four. And that's why the Twins, over Baldelli's tenure from 2019 to 2025, were 29th in stolen bases over his time as manager. And when you look at the Twins post-trade deadline, when Rocco Baldelli said, you know what, forget it. We are just going to steal bases. We are going to push the envelope. We're going to do all this stuff because what do we got to lose? And when he did that, the Twins actually were pretty darn good at stealing. They were only one stolen base away from being the top stolen base team in baseball post-trade deadline. Only the New York Mets stole more bases than the Minnesota Twins post-trade deadline. Overall in the season, the Twins finished 16th in stolen bases. And if you want to look at a comparable mark with Derek Shelton, who was managing the Pittsburgh Pirates, they roughly stole the same amount of bases. So again, it's not like we're predicting this giant, huge change, but again, fundamentals are going to be where Derek Shelton is going to, if the talent on the field is going to be the same, if he can get them to improve on the fundamentals and smooth those out, it is going to, even if they don't win a ton more games, it's going to be more pleasing for fans to watch. And at the end of the day, if you want to get butts and seats, if you want to get people watching and caring about the Twins, they have to look good when they're on TV or when you go watch them, right? So that's the other thing. It's finding an exciting brand of baseball, or at least a fun to watch brand of baseball. And I think when you look at the situation for the Twins, they do have an opportunity to be better fielders because you do have better speed with Keyshaw and Buxton, and of Walker Jenkins, who's going to come up at some point. You have Royce Lewis, who's found a nice home at third base, even if he doesn't quite have the arm. We'll get to him in a second in the show, but there is a way you can cobble together a better defense for the Twins, and it starts with Byron Buxton being healthy, getting some extra help from some prospects coming up. And not only that, I think it does help the speed as well for Derek Shelton. If you want to look at stolen bases, for an example, Luke Keyshaw would have stolen a ton of bases had he been healthy all year long, and he did steal a lot of bases in the limited time that he played for the Twins last season. Byron Buxton, another healthy season, helps out a lot. Royce Lewis starting to get back in the groove of stealing bases. And that's pretty much it for a lot of the main guys on the Twins roster in terms of stolen bases. But if you have a Kaelen Culpepper that comes up, he stole 25 bases in St. Paul last year, or combined between St. Paul and Wichita last year. You look at Walker Jenkins, who's got the capability to steal some bases. Gabby Gonzalez, Manuel Rodriguez, you throw those guys in there. There is the capability for the Twins, not saying that they're going to be number one in the league, but for the capability of them to be a nice, fundamental team that has the tools to be fundamentally good. And that's the thing. The Twins never have had the tools to be a fundamentally good defensive team. They have just been limited players defensively and athletically, and that is what's led them to have bad defensive numbers, bad base running numbers, and especially in a post-Correa Twins defensive look. Correa wasn't the best defender all the time, but he certainly was a very good defender, generally speaking, the best defender on the team, not named Byron Buxton, and at the most important position in the infield defensively and shortstop. And the Twins are going to have issues there. So they are going with Brooks Lee. They just will defensively. So they are going to have to figure out how to be fundamentally sound, where even if they can't make all of the plays, even if they can't get to every single ball in the hole, can you make the plays that are in front of you? And if you do that, you have a chance to put yourself in positions. But again, this is an uphill battle for Shelton. He can say all the time, we need to be better fundamentally. He can say, I talked with Tom Kelly, and here's what Tom Kelly told me, and here's what all of this stuff happens. But it actually has to get done, because every team says every year they want to work on fundamentals and be fundamentally sound. And then the regular season comes, and then, that happens. So Derek Shelton is doing and saying the right things as new Twins skipper when it comes to being fundamentally sound and wanting to work on all that stuff. But don't expect the team to be vastly different from the one that preceded it until they do. They have the potential to be better, but don't believe it till you see it. All right, we're going to talk about the third base situation, how Royce Lewis ranks, and then where his backups rank as well, because it's kind of it's not a great situation. We'll take a look at the Twins' possibility to maybe extend Pablo López now that his market is gone down. We're going to talk about that and more right after this. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your Profit Boost or any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I know a lot of people love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your Profit Boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Twins your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It's access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Twins, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Go to lockedontwins.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, so should the Minnesota Twins give Pablo López a 1 to 2 year kind of cushion contract extension? It's not the first time that that's happened in Twins history, right? Michael Pineda was signed in 2018 to a 2-year contract, and he was going to miss all of 2018 with Tommy John. But what the Minnesota Twins banked on was, okay, well, now we have him under contract for 2019, and he can spend all year rehabbing in our facility. We already are interested in this guy. Let's get him in our building. Let's have him pitch for us and work out for us and rehab with us. That way we can aid his rehab and get him ready and kind of have him ready to go in the exact way we want him to by the time he comes back from Tommy John surgery. Now, that was a free agent signing, but another recent example is Chris Paddack. Chris Paddack needed Tommy John, tore his UCL in 2022, and he missed all the rest of that season, basically since April on, and he came back in the middle of 2023. But in between the 2022 and 2023 seasons, the Twins signed him to a 3-year contract extension, pretty modest numbers, just to basically get him on the team, to continue to keep him with the Twins throughout his rehab process in 2023. And then you have him for 2024 and 2025. And what it does for the player is it gives them the financial security to know that they're taken care of, to know that they will be on a roster. And also for the Twins, it allows the player to rehab in your building. You can tell them, hey, here's what we'd like you to prioritize on. Here's our plan for you. And it kind of is a win-win in both situations. So with Pablo López, he's making about $21.5 million a year on his contract for this year and next year. But at the end of the 2027 season, he will become a free agent. And so there's a lot of people that have been talking, since we now know Pablo López is going to miss all of 2026 with Tommy John surgery. We talk about the breakdown in an emergency podcast from Tuesday night. Go back and listen to that wherever you get your podcasts and YouTube on the Locked On feed. But what if the Twins, and this has been speculating around social media, what if they decide, you know what, let's give him a 1 to 2 year, maybe even 3-year short-term contract that basically will give Pablo López security throughout his process of Tommy John, to know that he is a team, to know that he's a contract, and it allows the Twins to keep Pablo López on their team at a depreciated value. So Pablo López, I mean, making $21.5 million, that's still a steal for an ace starting pitcher. If you want to look at ace starting pitchers, they are making somewhere in the 25 on the low end, really 28 to $42 million is where ace starting pitchers get. Pablo López right now is an ace pitcher getting paid like a number 2 or a really good number 3, depending on the name or who you are as a pitcher. But generally speaking, the Pablo López extension was a steal. It was a bargain for the Twins and a good move by Falvey to lock him down about a month into Pablo López being with the Minnesota Twins. So there is that trust there, right? The Twins have developed Pablo. He said all the right things. He loves his time in Minnesota. And if you're the Twins, if you're willing to get him, obviously you'd have to give him a slight pay bump just because of his track record, and the league market. But if you sign Pablo López to a 1 to 2 year-ish deal at $25 million, that's not that bad. It's a $4 million pay bump. It gives him a nice little bump in pay, but also you're still paying him just as much as the Boston Red Sox are paying Sonny Gray right now. So it's not like it's oh my gosh, this is a huge number for somebody in their 30s. Sonny Gray was making that much money this year, last year, and in 2024. So it's not unprecedented for somebody like Pablo López to make that much money, and you'd still be getting him depreciated, because if he were to hit the open market, he would be making upwards of $30 million. So there is that sense of, hey, we could do it this way, set it up this way, and now we have Pablo López under contract through his rehab. And I mean, they would anyways, because he'll come back in the middle of next season. Assuming the 2027 season happens, he will come back in the middle of next season, and he'll be a free agent after that. But if you're Pablo, do you want to pitch half of 2027 trying to recover from Tommy John, knowing that you're an impending free agent and everything that happens could be the difference between making $8 million and making $28 million, right? Like there's a lot of fluctuation in there depending on how things go. And if you're the Twins, you just give them an extra year cushion to keep them through, let's say 2029 instead of through 2028 or something, or through 2028 instead of 2027, something like that. You just give him one more year. It allows him to fully come into 2028, and then he can pitch well, set his own market, and get one more contract. Because the Twins set it up with this short-term deal to tell Pablo, you're getting paid, we'll give you a pay bump, and in return, we'll buy out the last couple of years of arbitration, and now, we'll get the first couple of years of your free agency period. That was essentially how this contract worked out. I think the money, if you can get to the 25-ish million range, and it's a short-term deal, like I wouldn't even go 3 years. I would say 1 to 2, even if you just want to slap on a year, just to tell Pablo he can get the security of fully making sure he gets back up to speed throughout 2027 and allow 2028 to be the go year. I think that makes sense. Now, that being said, I still don't know if I would do it. One, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Pablo just had the injury happen. I think respectfully, you're not going to go to his camp and be like, hey, want to sign in a contract while your value's the lowest it's been in years? That's probably not what he's going to do. Pablo's going to take some time. He's going to think about it. He's got to process some stuff. Let Pablo get right mentally before you run back to him with contract talks. Also, if you're Pablo López, if you're, do you want to just hit free agency? Do you not want to wait? Do you say, I want to take my chances and bet on myself and get that contract and figure it out? I can always sign a prove-it deal with somebody else and I can have a better chance to compete. If the Twins crater worse than we expect them to this year, they could look at a rebuild and go, this is longer than we thought, and Joe Ryan could get traded, and Pablo López would have gotten traded had he been healthy if the team doesn't perform by the trade deadline. So if you're Pablo, do you want to sign back on for a rebuilding team, even if they're one that has given you the payday before? And also, you have to look at the limited budget of the Minnesota Twins. And for those who aren't watching on YouTube, I use limited in air quotes. But will the Twins want to sign a pitcher to $25 million? Will that happen? There's the lockout coming. What's going to happen with that? The Minnesota Twins could look completely different salary-wise if a salary cap and a salary floor gets put in place, and if all this other stuff happens. Like, I'm looking at it from that aspect of, if you're the Twins at this point, not knowing what's going to happen in 2027 and not expected to be competitive despite their claims in 2026, it may, like, from the 30,000-foot view, does it make sense for them to just not spend any money and not commit themselves to contracts until the salary structure is put in place and you can move on, knowing that? Like, if you sign a guy to a big contract, let's say the Twins sign Pablo López, I'm just throwing this number out there, to a 5-year, $30 million contract, and then the salary cap hits, and all of a sudden the Twins are impacted by the salary cap, and now they can't go sign a free agent who's in their mid-20s, and now they're locked into Pablo López, who will be 32, and then you have him for like his 32 through 35 seasons, ages. Like, that's not necessarily the best bet to play. It stinks because I love Pablo and I want him to be a Twin for the rest of his career. But if we're looking at this realistically, the Twins may be best just letting things play out, seeing what happens. You can always revisit an extension going into 2027 or whenever the season picks up in 2027. You can always look at that and get an extension later. There is no rush to do it if you're the Minnesota Twins, unless you really feel like you want Pablo López long-term and want to just get it while the getting's good and lock it down. There's no rush for the Twins to do it. There is no deadline. And they have the limited budget. And here's the thing about the budget. If you are going to commit $25 to $30 million to Pablo López, you have a younger version of Pablo López in Joe Ryan on your roster, who will be a free agent the same time Pablo López will be. And I love Pablo. And I think Pablo at this very moment before the injury was better than Joe Ryan. But that being said, we got to think long-term. Joe Ryan is in his mid to late 20s. Pablo López is in his early 30s. You got to think about the long-term play. If you could, and again, there's no reason the Twins can't extend both of them. But if you're looking at it of a binary choice of having to decide between And the reality is the Twins probably won't pay either one. But if you have the scenario where it's like, we can only give money to Joe Ryan or we can only give money to Pablo López in terms of high-end front of the rotation starter money, well, at that point, the better long-term play is probably Joe Ryan, right? Pablo López has had 2 Tommy John surgeries now over the course of his career. He had injuries last year with his shoulder. Is that a long-term play you want to make? Or is Joe Ryan the better long-term play to lock up? And if you're going to use that money, now Ryan would cost more than a depreciated Pablo López, but at least you'd have the down payment, right? You'd have a majority of the money ready to go. And then you just need to figure out how to get to the final 10 to 15 million or whatever it's going to take to get Joe Ryan. Because Joe Ryan, when he hits the open market, is going to get paid. Top end starting pitchers are making at least $25 million. He's going to be making close to $30 million. He just will be. He's coveted. He's an all-star. He's all that stuff. He is going to be somebody who, when he hits the open market, will be highly sought after and one of the top paid starting pitchers of the market whenever he decides to hit free agency, whether that be in 2020, after the 2027 season, or whether it be the Twins sign to an extension, or whether a team trades for Joe Ryan and they sign him to an extension. So if given the binary choice between Ryan and López, at this point, I got to go with Ryan. And it's not because I don't like Pablo or think Pablo will be bad, but the better long-term play at that point is Joe Ryan. And we're going to wrap up the show by talking about third base and what's behind Royce Lewis and what Royce Lewis has to do as well. It's all coming up right after this. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed, Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. All right, third base is Royce's spot, but what's behind him and what happens if Royce struggles for a third season in a row? So first of all, third base depth, Royce Lewis. He's number one. He's the guy. You have a ton of options behind him: Brooks Lee, Cody Clemens, a couple others. We'll get into the deep dive. But Royce is your starting third baseman. He is your third baseman of the future unless something drastic happens to the Minnesota Twins and to Royce Lewis. But Royce has good range for a third baseman. His arm is weaker than you'd think, which is kind of why the Twins had those talks a couple of years ago about moving him to second base. But he's fine at third base in terms of his range. He's able to get to a lot of baseballs. He just sometimes has troubles with those throws across the diamond. But Royce overall is a fine third baseman. I don't think he's a defensive liability by any stretch of the imagination at the hot corner. And it is a testament to him developing into being a third baseman from his time, in 2023, kind of got his feet wet there. 2024 and 2025, he really started to hunker down at that third base spot. And he really has showed why he should be considered that. He's done a lot of growth over the last few years at that position. The biggest thing, though, is Royce has got a hit, and third base is a spot where you need a lot of good production from as a hitter. You need a lot of good production from your corner outfielders and your corner infielders. Those are the four spots on the diamond where it's like, you got to hit. We can even take limited defense if you can hit. And Royce, even though he's okay as a fielder and an above average fielder, he has to do damage against fastballs at the plate. He has a -7 rating against four-seam fastballs, according to Baseball Savant. Not great at all. Now, he does a good job getting the ball in the air. He does a good job pulling the ball in the air. The problem is his exit velocity is above average, but not necessarily super great. He's not hammering every single pitch. And the reason why is because I think he's had trouble barreling up the baseball. He's had trouble getting the right spot of the bat on the ball and being able to do damage with it. Swings and misses are worse than league average, which also doesn't help. And then, of course, if you're swinging at a lot of pitches, you're making contact, not always with the pitch you can do the most damage against. And that's not to say that you can't foul off pitches and fight off and whatever, and you can only do things with one specific pitch. But that being said, you do need to know which pitches you can do the most damage on and be able to execute when you get those opportunities instead of just kind of free swinging, which at times is what Royce Lewis has done, right? Royce Lewis, the first few years of his career, was kind of doing everything on all talent alone. Now that the league has figured him out, now that he has to make the adjustments, he's struggled to make those adjustments. And the reason I say it's been all talent alone is because he's been injured. He didn't have time he didn't have a minor league season in 2020, missed 2021 with an ACL, missed a lot of 2022 with an ACL, and then missed a good chunk of 2024 as well. So there's a lot of parts of the Minnesota Twins development of Royce Lewis that's just been injuries that has stalled. It's not that Royce isn't taking it seriously. That's not what I'm implying. It's more that he just missed a lot of time on the field. Now we're getting to the point where he's starting to catch back up on that. And now he needs to start to own up to being able to just produce. That's all it is. He's just got to consistently find a way to square up hittable pitches. It doesn't mean that he needs to swing it doesn't inherently mean he needs to swing less. You know what I mean? If he's a free swinger, it's not that a free swinger is necessarily a bad archetype to have as a player. It just means that you need to be able to, when you swing, fight off the pitches and not dribble them over to shortstop or roll them over to second base. You need to be able to fight those ones off, but also do damage against the pitches you need to do damage against. So that's the outlook for Royce Lewis. If he does that, he'll get back to being the player he was in 2022, 2023, and the first part of 2024. Otherwise, he'll be what he was from June of 2024 since, which has been a below average hitter. And with the guy as talented as Royce, he's got to, it's in there. We know it is. He's just got to find a way to make the adjustments and consistently hit better. What's behind him? Because this is the thing. Gio Urshela was a minor league free agent, and I think he's okay as a depth piece. You don't want to rely on him for very long. He's a great clubhouse presence. He's good to have around. But that being said, he wasn't as good of a defender as we remember with him when he was the Twins' third baseman in 2022, and his age has only made that worsen. So he isn't necessarily a guy who's like, oh, well, if Royce is out for 2 weeks, Gio Urshela is going to come in and we're going to be okay. We're going to be in rough shape if we have to rely on Gio Urshela for a long period of time. Same thing goes for Orlando Arcia. 202 batting average, 545 OPS. That ain't going to cut it. He was an all-star in 2023, but has been nothing close to that since then. He plays best defensively at second base, actually. We'll talk about that later on in our defensive breakdowns, but he's a +3 outs above average at second base. But at third base, he is a +1 outs above average. He's actually -1 at shortstop if you look at his numbers from last year, which isn't the best considering his function was designed to be the backup shortstop, basically, or like a backup shortstop option for the Twins. And the biggest thing is they got to be good defensively. And I think Arcia can be okay defensively. It's why I give him the edge over Urshela. But also, Urshela gets the slight edge as a hitter. But it's not a drastic edge. So you still got to factor all that in if you're the Twins. Tanner Schobel was a Twins prospect. I think he was like a top 10 Twins prospect, according to MLB.com, in 2024. He's close to the big leagues, but man, he did not have a great year in St. Paul, and in fact fell off MLB.com's top 30 prospect list by the end of 2025. So and the farm system got a little bit of a makeover since then. So it's a little bit disingenuous to assume to just assume that he'll never get better. But he definitely took a step back. Ryan Kreidler is somebody who the Twins claimed off waivers from the Tigers. Can play a little third, but is another depth option. Can't really hit. We've mentioned him. He can play a lot of different positions. But overall, can he play any of them really well? Not really. Can he hit really well? Also not really. Tristan Gray is an option. The Twins got him from the Red Sox in a minor league deal. Can play some third base. but was a -2 outs above average there last season. And in fact, maybe he's a little better at shortstop. We'll talk about that when we discuss shortstop tomorrow. But Brooks Lee, likely your starting shortstop, but again, is limited. If he couldn't cut it, do they maybe move him over to third base if Royce is hurt or if Royce can't play or whatever? And a lot of that would depend on if Kaelen Culpepper comes up and does some damage. Kaelen Culpepper also could potentially move to third base if, again, Royce is injured and Lee ends up holding it down at second. There's some things you got to consider with that. But, Kaelen Culpepper is an option, although probably not at third base until proven he can't handle shortstop, because the Twins, with Brooks, with Culpepper, with even Merrick Houston, they're just starved for good shorts, like a legit bona fide, this guy can stick at shortstop prospect, and they're going to give them a chance before they move them. So there is a chance that you could see either Lee or Culpepper move over if that's the case. Cody Clemens is your emergency option at third base, but he hasn't played there since 2024, and he was a -3 outs above average there. So I don't think third base is essentially his spot. He pretty much is your second baseman / corner outfielder, maybe plays a little first base here and there for the Twins as well, although they've deepened that position. So again, the Twins have a lot of these guys that, I don't know, they can play here, they can play there. They play like 8 different positions, but they don't play any of them particularly well. So what are we supposed to make about that? So a lot of them can't hit very well. And so it's a lot of, there's depth, but is there quality depth? And I don't really think the Twins have a ton of that in the infield outside of their minor league prospects, who again, you can't just bank on them coming up. But there isn't necessarily a big barrier to those guys if they perform well in AAA to getting up to the big leagues and getting some playing time. And it's what we talked about with the outfield. It's going to be true with the infield, where the Twins have a bevy of options to pick from in the minor leagues. The pathway is open, and it feels like the Twins, mainly because they didn't sign a lot of veterans because of, again, air quotes, payroll limitations, they are going to rely on those young guys coming up and performing if they want to be competitive in 2026. All right, thanks for tuning into today's Locked On Twins. Tomorrow, we'll break down more storylines from spring training, a look at shortstop for the Twins in 2026 and their future at the position as well, and more. Make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Twins so you get all the latest episodes. You can find me on X at BombCJ30, and if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Twins ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedontwins.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you on video, we now send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel. On audio, make sure your second listen is Locked On MLB. I'm CJ Baumgartner. See ya.